You are listening to the Lawyer Stories podcast with host Benny Gold. Lawyer Stories was founded in July 2017 and is an expanding global network of lawyers and law students sharing their personal journeys to the noble profession of the practice of law. Join us on this podcast as we dig deeper into these stories and hear from lawyers and law students from around the world in all areas of the legal profession. Here at Lawyer Stories, we believe that every lawyer has a story. What's yours?
Welcome to the Lawyer Stories podcast with Benny Gold. Today we welcome in Scott Rahn, founding partner at RMO Probate Litigation, with offices in LA, Orange County, San Diego, KC, Miami, Houston, and I believe the list goes on a little bit. So congratulations on the expansion. Super cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, very glad to have you here and record this episode. You have a really cool story how you got to where you are now. How are you doing?
I'm well. And it's the only story I got, Benny. So I if you're looking for a different one, you're not going to get it.
There you go. And you have an office in Kansas City?
We do.
So are they all pumped for the Super Bowl, which this is recorded a few weeks back? Okay, cool. That's good. All right. So Scott, I'm going to start here with your story. Like, you went to undergrad in Wisconsin, right? And you grew up like on a farm, like helping your dad. You had a lot of different jobs actually, which was kind of cool. I mean, you were working for your dad's like auto repair business, construction, which is like, I don't know, like that had to be kind of difficult, right? And it's hard work, right? So, pizza places, but you went to school in Wisconsin and then you ended up out in like LA. So I think that's cool. So like, tell us what it was like being in Wisconsin and growing up in like a farm area.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up, very blue collar, hardworking, honest, salt of the earth farm country outside of Green Bay. My grandparents had a dairy farm, and, I spent every break and weekend and summer vacation out there helping out, milking cows and plowing fields and baling hay and all the things that you do on a dairy farm.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. And Wisconsin's a great school. So you were a Badger, right? That's their
I am a Badger.
Very cool. My brother-in-law, I believe, is also a Badger. So like, when did you know, like in college, or was it early on? I think you talk about a North Star in your story. Yeah. Tell us when you knew you wanted to be a lawyer.
I can pin it back as far as fifth grade. Okay. I wanted to either be a lawyer or a jet fighter pilot, which is pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. There are some similarities.
Tom Cruise has made movies about both.
Yeah, that is true. You can't handle the truth. That's right. So you knew back then, but like, why not the jet fighter? Why didn't you go with like the airplanes?
To be honest with you, it goes back to high school and talking to my guidance counselor about wanting to go to the Air Force Academy. And he was a better assistant football coach than he was a guidance counselor, because he basically said, "Oh, that's too hard. You'll never get in there." And not knowing any better, I said, "Oh, okay." And just walked away from it.
Really? Okay. So then I don't know. Do you ever think about that at all? Like what could have been of like flying like planes and stuff? Okay. Well, you're doing pretty well now, so I don't really think you need to look back on that.
And I love what I do. So, I mean, even if that had been the other path, I couldn't be happier than to be where I am.
Yeah, for sure. And your first job at law school was like 4.5 years or so. Like, like tell us what that was like.
It was a great experience. I mean, you don't know anything, right?
Was it a smaller law firm though? I know you moved on to big law, right? But like, so what was tell us like the size of the firm, the breakdown.
Sure. It was about 75, 80 lawyers, a regional firm out here on the West Coast.
Okay.
With offices mostly in California. Most of the lawyers were here, but we had an office in Seattle, an office in Alaska, because they did a lot of maritime stuff. So, shipping and things like that. But I was on the litigation side of things, and it was a great place to grow up. I've got very fond memories and wonderful things to say. Still a lot of friends from that first firm. And actually my partner, Sean, who is the M in RMO, he and I were summer associates together at that firm and shared an office. So the story of our firm, I like to say, is an overnight success, 22 years in the making.
Yeah, that's amazing. Where were you in law school?
University of San Diego. Go
Okay,
Square.
so how did you tell me how you got out to California?
Yeah, so it was a blustery, wintry day
Yep.
in January, Wisconsin, minus 35. Everything was cold and frozen, and school was canceled, businesses were closed. And I had a buddy of mine who had been a Marine at Camp Pendleton. He had moved back to Wisconsin. It was his first winter back, and he called and said, I've had enough of this stuff. I'm moving back to Southern California. I got a friend who has a house in Huntington Beach. Let me know if you're interested. And I looked outside and I said, yep, sounds good.
Yeah, I'm there. Have you ever been to California?
I had
No.
never really been outside the state other than Chicago.
Wow, so you like went and didn't really look back, right?
I mean, I came out for about 6 months. The irony is I came out and about 2 weeks later, my buddy moved back to Wisconsin and kind of left me hanging.
2 months later?
2 weeks later.
2 weeks later?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
So,
That's probably a
so I
story
made a
for
go
another
of it.
day.
Yeah, I made a go of it for about 6 months. I was a teller at Wells Fargo. I was doing
Nice.
promotions up here in Los Angeles. I was working at a bike shop, more jobs,
You
just
were
to make sure
hustling. That's
checking every
you were
category. I
hustling.
was hustling. Yeah.
You were hustling.
But then I went back to Wisconsin to finish my undergrad degree because I was already a non-traditional student, having taken that time off,
Okay.
a couple of years after high school where I was doing the construction before I, really knew that college was a path for me.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And so you ended up out there for law school. What was your whole law school experience like?
Law school was great. Made a lot of great friends for life. Learned a lot. Had the opportunity to work at some good jobs with some good people. My first job, ironically enough, I apparently didn't make too good of an impression because I had dinner with my boss about 2, 3 years ago. We sat down for dinner and I said, "Hey, I just wanted to thank you for giving me my first opportunity." And he said, "You worked for me?" We had become such good friends. He had forgotten that I had worked for him in law school. I thought, well,
Wow.
at least I didn't make a bad impression.
There you are thinking about it the whole time. So
Right.
what so you went into big law. Like how did you get into big law? And what area in big law were you working?
Yeah, I was still in litigation. And
Right.
I went and worked for Foley and Lardner,
Yep.
who is a Wisconsin-based firm.
Okay.
So Wisconsin-based kid, Wisconsin-based firm. So I joined them out here in Los Angeles and spent a couple of years there and was in their trust and estates group.
Okay.
And was tipped to take the group over at the beginning of 2008. And then in 2008, the entire world turned upside down. And by the end of 2008, instead of taking over the group, they were shutting it down. So
Wow. So
I had to pivot, and I did.
okay. So is that when you opened your firm?
No, actually, I pivoted. I ended up going to Greenberg Traurig at the end
Oh
of
yeah.
2009, and I was at Greenberg
Wow.
for about 6 years and did the partnership track there. Had a great experience. It's a great firm, great people. Learned a lot. Learned a lot how to, even be a better lawyer. Rose up the ranks there, but it's a big firm, and a lot of big firms, see individual clients as conflicts, as opposed to what I see them as is people that need help. And
Gotcha.
so it
What
came
do
a
you
time.
mean? See that like big firms will see somebody as a conflict.
Yeah. So, most big firms want, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 clients, right? Repeat business. People are going to continually
Okay.
retain their services year over year, and they can
Right.
cross sell their corporate work and their tax work and their, M&A and all those things.
Gotcha.
And those aren't individuals, right? So if they have a corporate client and they have an individual client, and then the corporate client wants to sue the individual, or the individual wants to sue the corporate client, they might be conflicted out. So they'd rather have the relationship with the big corporation that's going to feed them lots of work, as opposed to the individual client that might feed them, one big case, but only the one.
That makes sense. So when you go to a big firm, do they put you in a certain area? Like, how did you get involved with the estates practice?
Yeah, I had already had experience in the estates
Okay.
practice, so I was already in that space. And I'd done a bunch of other work as well. I mean, I've been doing fiduciary work my whole life, representing, banks and broker dealers and wirehouses and things like that. So the trust companies are just another, service group of most of those big financial institutions. So I had been doing work for them for a long time.
Okay.
For example, when Morgan Stanley got out of the trust business, we, basically helped shut the lights off. We had their last case in California, and they, shuttered their trust business after we shut them down.
So Scott, tell me, like, why trust? Why these people, like, why are you, I mean, I love that your firm has, you lead with empathy at your firm. You're there to help people. I think that's tremendous. But like, why? Why? I mean, not why, but why trust or estates and
Yeah,
that sort of thing, wills.
because it's all people centric,
Yeah.
right? It's about people's lives. It's about people's stories,
Yep.
their legacies, and the family issues that every family has that thwart or interfere or disrupt those things.
Okay.
And the practice area leads to the most fascinating human storylines, good, bad, and frankly, ugly. And we get an opportunity to come in and help families, help people at a time where they're feeling really lost and with, up a creek without a paddle, and they often don't know which way to turn because this isn't something people do every day. So we get an
Right.
opportunity to hold their hands and walk them through, a very challenging emotional time in their lives,
Sure.
and walk them through a legal process that is foreign.
Right. And I just want to point out too, I mean, you went from partner track, like you said, at a big firm, and you said, okay, like, this isn't really, you probably said, okay, I want to do something more like client centric, like rather than business. And you launched your own firm. Like, you walked away from a big firm to open your own firm that
Correct.
focuses on people first. How do you do that? Like, how does somebody say, okay, like, I'm at this big firm and like, I'm doing pretty well, you get this and that. Like, how do you do that? How do you start fresh?
It's a great question. A lot of gumption, a lot
Yep.
of help, right? A lot of friends, mentors, people who showed me the way, right? And were willing to hold my hand and help me along that way.
Yeah.
And, you look at it and you say, look, I can either choose the firm, who may not really want my clients, or I can choose my clients. And at the end of the day, the reality is that, our clients pay our bills, and our clients are the reasons why we work as hard as we do to get them the good results we do.
Right.
So, for me, it was an easy choice. If I wanted to keep doing what I was doing at the level that I was doing it, I needed to go in a different direction. And, fortunately, I've never had to look back. And, we've literally helped thousands and thousands and thousands of families over the course of the last
Yeah.
10 years.
That's amazing. And you opened RMO LLP you went right from big firm, opened RMO LLP. Where was your first office? Where's like your home base, do you consider?
Home base is Los Angeles.
Okay.
So we subleased an office from a friend of mine who, after the fact, basically told me, I just subleased you an office because I wanted you to join our firm, and I thought if you were here that you you would join us. And I said, well, I appreciate that. And we were there for a couple of years before we, got our own space.
Yep.
And we did that for 5 years. And then we just bought our own building this year on the west side last year now.
Wow.
On the
Congratulations.
west side of LA. Thank you. Thank
That's
you. So,
amazing. That's
and
that's
that's
huge.
our headquarters.
That's amazing. Um, what advice could you share to somebody who's in big law who wants to branch out and launch their own firm? I mean, obviously people in big law are, very well recruited. They have the cream of the crop accolades. And um, what would be your advice to somebody in big law who wants to go off and do their own thing?
Bet on yourself,
Yep.
right? But spend the time. It wasn't an overnight decision for me. It was a bit of an epiphany. I was contemplating a move away from big law, and I was talking to some of our local competitors, some of the smaller boutique firms. And it was during a lunch, one of these recruiting lunches, where one of my friends basically was trying to sell me on leaving big law. and asked me the question of, where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? Do you see yourself at, one of these behemoth law firms that are so impersonal and
Right.
blah, blah, blah. And I just blurted out, running my own firm. And it was an out of body experience, like I saw
Really?
myself, I saw myself outside myself looking down and saying, wait, did you just say that? I think you just
Yeah.
said that.
Is it something
I
you
think
always
that,
wanted to do? Like, was it always at the back of your mind?
not really. I was pretty happy being a big law
Yeah.
lawyer. I like the resources,
Do they have a snack cart? Like, do they bring around the snack cart? Like, if you're there late at night, like, is that
in the olden days, some of the firms do, right, to make sure people stay and work, right? They offer food, late hour food, or they'll give you like a binder. Well, one of the firms that I know, hands out a binder, and they basically tell you, here's where you can sleep in the office, and here's a whole booklet of takeout menus, back in the day when they used to have takeout menus before you had
wow?
Postmates. And here's where you can shower in the morning, right? If you've stayed overnight, and those kinds of things. So yeah, those things do
Like,
happen.
what are you doing
The
then? So,
stories
and
are,
and obviously, this shows like my experience with like big law. But like, what are you doing that you need to be there for 2 in the morning? Is it like international clients that are like up 6 hours later than you, and you need to like be there like a few hours before them?
it, it's usually emergency motions and things like that.
Okay.
It's not anything other than that. So
Okay.
if you're if you're in a case that comes in and some emergency motion has been filed and you're having to scramble, or you're on a tight deadline, then you can end up being there very late. And I've
Okay.
certainly pulled my share of all-nighters
Amazing.
before opening my own firm. I will tell you that, knock on wood, we've built our firm differently.
Yeah.
We work, to live. We don't live to work.
It's good. It's
We
great.
treat our people very well. We all have families
Yep.
and other things that are more important to us than just working. But at the same time, we have to do a good job. We always tell people
Sure.
when we're recruiting, like, look, we're lawyers and we have a great work-life balance, but we're still litigators, right?
Yeah.
So we can't control when the other side's going to file a stupid motion that they shouldn't on an emergency basis, and we're going to have
Yeah.
to respond to it, right? Or we're going to have to jam and take somebody's deposition because they're dying, right? And we need to get their testimony. So there are things that, just the nature of being a lawyer and being a litigator that require
Right.
that. But, if you plan, and this is where I think if you plan to fail, right? Or if you fail to plan to fail,
Right.
I think a lot of lawyers don't do enough planning when it comes to their cases. If you
Okay.
plan and you have a strategy and you know what you're doing, you should be able to avoid most of that.
That's awesome. Thanks for that explanation. So let's talk more about RMO Probate Litigation LLP with your headquarters in Los Angeles. But how many people do you got working for you now?
We're about 35.
Just in LA or all over?
All over. The entire firm's about 35.
Okay, all over. So how does somebody go about expanding their firm to like different jurisdictions, different states?
Well, I think you need to identify where you should be first and foremost.
Okay.
We have such a specialized area of practice in that we only focus on probate litigation. So we don't do estate planning, we
Okay.
don't do taxes, we don't do, real estate work, we don't do, corporate work, other litigation. We're really just focused on doing estate litigation.
So tell me, Scott, for me and whoever's listening to this, who might not really understand, who might see probate and think you're like doing wills and you're doing trusts and you're executing all these things. Like, what does that mean? Like, you only
Sure.
do probate litigation? Tell us.
Sure. Yeah. So, and it's a great delineator. So a lot of people focus on creating wills, creating trusts, doing estate planning, and then helping people with the administration of estates after their loved one passes. We come in when there is some sort of dispute, disruption around the estate. If there is a will contest where somebody doesn't like what the will says, or there's a trust contest, somebody doesn't like what the trust says, or people are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, the trustees stealing assets, for example, or somebody's run off with, the family jewels, and you need to
Right.
pursue breach of fiduciary duty cases, theft cases, financial elder abuse cases, which are on the rise at an abhorrent rate, then we come in and we essentially resolve those cases,
That's
solve
interesting.
for the dysfunction. That's what we do, and
That's
that's how.
really interesting. So somebody, if there was a contest, a will contest, they wouldn't go back to the person who originally executed their will, like the attorney. They would be like, okay, I need somebody who specializes in this probate like litigation, because there is going to be a contest about like it's going to be contested, who's going to get
Most
what.
frequently, yeah, most frequently for us, Benny, the people will go back to the person who prepared the
Right.
documents, but oftentimes they're not litigators, right? They do
Right.
what we do, we do what we do. And so we can co-counsel cases with those people, right?
Okay.
Work on it together to defend the work that was done by the estate planner. Or most often they'll just refer the case to us. And we
Okay.
kind of come in, we ninja assassin the dispute
Yeah.
side of it, right? And then once the dispute's over, we turn the client back over to the estate planner to complete the administration, do
Okay.
whatever other estate planning
So you
work they
must, yeah.
do.
So you must have seen some crazy like will contests, sort of,
Oh,
right?
it's the best. It's
So
the
like,
best.
can you give us? Do you want to give us an example of something that you've seen?
Sure. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, the stories abound. I always
Yeah.
joke that, these cases are the, stuff that ends up on the floor of the writer's room at the Lifetime Network because nobody's going to believe it, right? We had a case with a young Nigerian man
Yep.
who was in this country and had a pretty checkered past, I would say. Who married, and I'm using air quotes because the marriage was effectuated by a mobile justice of the peace in the hospital, uh, while this person was essentially comatose.
Really?
Yeah, and in his 80s. So you had a 55-year age gap, of an elderly person, being married by this, young, you know, I don't want to use any derogatory terms by this young person. And then all of the will and trust documents were changed, and our clients were essentially disinherited as a result of this, fraudster's bad acts.
Wow.
And we swooped in, and this is probably one of the cases we're proudest of. We came in about 45 days. We came in and we got our client 100 cents on the dollar. We got their full inheritance because we basically pulled together all the evidence we needed to show who this person was, what they had done, and we also got our attorney's fees in that case. So that was a
Wow.
great result. I mean, another example is a case where, and this was a celebrity case here in LA, where the celebrity had passed and her sister was set to inherit the estate, and the boyfriend showed up with some handwritten documents that certainly had a number of question marks, but because the documents were at issue, the other side, the boyfriend, was offering our client pennies to basically settle with our client, and the estate planning lawyer brought us in because this is all we do, and they know that. And over the course of a couple months, we came in and completely turned the case around, and our client walked away with a substantial part of the estate.
Wow. That's amazing. And you've also had some sort of, or maybe it was local or national coverage on the Britney Spears case a
Correct.
year or two ago. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we do quite a bit of contested conservatorship and
Yep.
guardianship work, usually on behalf of the family seeking to establish or the family seeking to resist a conservatorship. And the reason we were brought in so many times by so many sources to speak on it is because of that experience. Conservatorships and guardianships are really a hot button topic since Britney's, and they're a last resort for most courts. The
Yeah.
courts don't like them, they don't want to establish them, but they will in the right circumstances, right, with the right limitations. So we've fought over a number of contested conservatorships, and frankly have a very good track record in that space, because I think we have a pretty keen understanding of what the courts are going to be willing to do, what they're not going to be willing to do, and frankly what the alternatives are, because there are always different ways to slice that. And if you have a deep understanding of what the courts are going to do and how to help them get there, so that they feel good about it too, right? Because nobody wants to play God and take somebody's rights away if they don't have to, but they also want to be able to protect people. And as I mentioned earlier, with the increasing amount of elder abuse going on out there, this is an area that is primed for explosive growth. We were talking earlier about your trip to Florida, California, Florida. You get into any of these money centers and retirement centers in the country, and the amount of fraud is significant. I sit on the board here in Southern California for the Alzheimer's Association, and the numbers are staggering.
That's amazing. It's crazy because I've never even really thought about all this, like in terms of I've personally thought of like doing a couple different. I'm licensed in 3 states, and I do something totally different, but I've thought about doing like estate planning and like this will, but I've never thought really about all those actually law school scenarios where when there's a will that there's a specific area. So this is really, really interesting. And you definitely deal with people who are, really probably very anxious, very like emotional, like come to you and they're like, this is happening. This person's going to take my money. Like I have this like, this estate, and it's like, help me, So what is the first thing you do when somebody brings you a case? What will RMO probate litigation do when obviously you review the facts, right? Do you ask for the will? Do you ask for the trust to review? And then you sort of, what's the process like?
The first thing we do is we sit down and have a very involved and deep conversation with the client about what happened. One of my mentors likes to tell the story that when he was a younger lawyer, he would have clients come in and he would have his checklist of things that he liked to ask.
Right.
And when the client would come in, they would start to tell their story, and he would say, wait, look, I have this broken down. Right. I'm the lawyer. These are the things I need to know. And if we get to the end of this and there's something else you want to tell me, then you can tell me that. And he said, I would go through my list, and almost without fail, nobody would have anything to add by the time we got done.
Okay.
And then a couple of years later, he said, I was involved in a case, and the case went on for a couple of years, and we get into trial, and the other side asks a question at trial that hadn't been asked yet, and the client gives the answer, and it blows up the whole case. And we go on a recess, and I say, why, what, this is the first I'm hearing of this. Why didn't you tell me this? And he said, you never asked. Right. And he said, that's when I learned, let them do the talking.
Let them talk. Right. Open-ended questions. So you ask them like what happened, and you have somebody in there, you're taking extensive, very detailed, meticulous notes.
The first thing I often say when I, get involved in that first call or that first conversation is, tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
Right. And that's it. Like, run me through it. Right. Why are we here? And how can we help you? And just, open-ended questions like that. But you need to give them an opportunity to really lay everything out, because they'll tell you good things. They'll tell you bad things, right? They'll tell you things that aren't going to help their case, which is going to allow you, because some people, there isn't a case there, right? That's just the reality of it. And for those people, to be frank, we want to be able to help them understand that they're going to be better off just moving on with their lives than being tied to this thing that isn't likely to ultimately get them a result, right? We don't. Two things we always tell people is that we don't want to waste of theirs is their money, but more importantly, we don't want to waste their time. So going through and having those meaningful discussions gives us an opportunity to help people who need to move forward and help people who shouldn't.
So how is RMO's approach different? Like, do you do it differently than anybody else? Like, what would you say makes you distinguishes you from anybody else?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One, I think our people first approach. I think it creates a relationship with our clients of trust and confidence, where when we give them advice, they're eager to hear it and follow it. So, we don't have client control issues, right? We don't walk into situations, whether it's a mediation or a trial, where we're surprised by anything our client does or doesn't do, right? And to be fair, with most of our cases, what I've found is when we go to a mediation or something with a retired judge, our presentation is pretty lean, pretty clean, and we don't have to spend a lot of time, right? That's one thing. Two, I think we do a better job of doing better diligence early, so we know our cases. And
Right.
being in this area and knowing what the strengths and weaknesses are, we're able to advise the client sooner on what we should do, right? Should we try to settle it? Should we negotiate a settlement? Should we try to drive it toward an early mediation? Should we file a motion? Should we try to drive this to an early trial if we're not going to be able to win that motion, right? In ways that get our clients better results sooner.
Wow. Okay. So, what advice would you give to somebody who wants to get into probate litigation?
Yeah. Can I steal 1 second? Because I think my computer's about to die. I hope you
Yeah,
can.
of course. Yeah.
Let me just grab my cord.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I charged it before this, but I didn't realize how quickly it would go down.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was your question?
So, what advice would you have for somebody who wants to get into probate litigation?
It's a great question. Do you think about it the right way? It's really a people first practice area. And do you have the bedside manner? Are you empathetic, right? Are you going
Yeah.
to, do you have the wherewithal to hold someone's hand, when they call you and say, this is what's happening to my mom or my dad,
Yeah.
and you need your help to protect them. When somebody calls and says, the family situation that I've been talking to you about for the last, 7 days has now exploded, and my mom or dad has passed, and we don't know what to do because my brother or sister or the caregiver has frozen us out and locked out all the accounts and stolen all the money and took the cars and the jewelry and all those things. Can you not only have the legal prowess to be able to address those things, but in a way that helps your client understand that they're going to be okay, that they're safe, right? And that you're going to do everything in your power to try to right that wrong, right? We're not magicians, right? We're not superheroes. We are just lawyers, Benny. So there are some
Right.
limitations to what we can do. But, if you're thinking about a practice in this area, I would encourage people, because I think it's a wonderfully rewarding area. And I'd invite anybody who's, listening to this to, reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about it. I love what we do.
That's
I feel
awesome.
very,
Yeah.
very
Well, you
blessed.
could tell. I mean, the way your path to what you're doing is just shows how this is very clear, especially the leading with empathy. Like what I mean, you just kind of explained what that meant to you, but you definitely need to have a lot of empathy in the type of law probate litigation that you're practicing. Um, how does someone know if they're gonna have a difficult time when they have a will, and they're how are they going to detect that they need you for your services?
They always know, Benny. They
Yeah.
always know. I mean, the stories abound of the people we've spoken with over the past, couple decades, where they will often say, like, we always knew we were going to have a problem with my sister or my brother.
Interesting.
They've always had their hand in the cookie jar. They've always, been relying on mom or dad, right? They took my mom's car, right, when she was older because she couldn't drive it anymore, even though she didn't give it to them. There's
Wow.
all those little things. So, it's one of those things where, families know families, right? You usually know who the black sheep is, right?
Right.
And who's going to be causing the problems. So paying attention to those things. But most frequently
Wow.
it's when something happens, right? When you see that, somebody's walked off with the family jewels, when you see that, mom or dad suddenly they don't have any money in their checking account, or they're not eating, or they're not sending the birthday checks that they used to send, and you start to have the conversations with them about why. And, well, I'm broke. Well, how are you broke? Like, you had $1 million last year, or
Yeah.
their property is suddenly owned by, their caregiver or their neighbor, or those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Or after somebody passes and, documents show up that, don't make any sense, right? How those things would come to pass.
Right.
Those are the times. And sometimes you have short statutes of limitations. So, having those conversations early, and we often consult as well with families, who have questions but aren't ready to pull the trigger, and walk them through what the pluses and minuses are of taking action now versus taking action later. And that's also something that, we help people so they at least understand, what the risks and rewards might be.
Yeah. Wow. No, that's interesting. You definitely know, like, you could tell you've been through and seen all the factors in this. So, are you going to write a book one day?
Maybe. I've thought about it.
Yeah.
We've got some outlines and things along
That's
those
cool.
lines,
Yeah.
because I think it'd just be helpful for people to have, a quick reference, if nothing else.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, where do you see RMO probate litigation like 5 to 10 years?
We will have a national platform.
Wow.
I would assume within the next 5. We have a 10-year plan that we've been executing for 3 years now. So we've got 7 years left on it, but we expect to be in New York and Chicago,
Nice.
Boston, throughout the rest of Florida, Texas, et cetera. So, we want to round that out, because we're so focused and only doing this.
Yeah.
And we feel that, and frankly, because I think we have a better mousetrap, largely because we take better care of people. I'd like to be in these places where people need us,
Mhm.
and be able to provide the same kind of service to these other legal communities that,
Yeah.
may be lacking.
That's great. So, Scott, did we leave anything out today?
I don't think so.
Is
I mean,
there
that's quite a lot, Benny.
you're gonna have to go to bed early now. So, because we discussed so much about what you do. So, is there any other advice that you'd like to, share with the Lawyer Stories community that we might have left out? I just want to make sure we've covered everything.
No, I mean, I think, look, community and people is what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
It's the reason we all do all the things, whether it's the small community in our homes, our families, right? Our local communities and the towns that we live in, our alumni communities, the schools we went to, our professional networks.
Yeah.
And that's really where the value in life comes from. And if you can be involved in a practice area where you get to work with people you love and admire and appreciate, and do something that helps people in those communities,
It's great.
it's one of those, it's not really work, right? So,
Yeah.
with 22 years into this overnight success story, but, even going back to just the relationship that I have with my partner, Sean,
Yeah.
of 22 years, right? It's about those relationships. So I think if you take a relationship focused approach to your practice, whatever it may be, I think you're just going to be a happier lawyer, because there are a lot of unhappy lawyers out there, but I think it's largely because they're thinking about it the wrong way.
They are. That's great advice. We appreciate it very much. And thanks for joining us tonight and
Thanks for having me.
telling us about yourself. So, please stay there. And everybody, thanks for tuning in. And wherever you are in the world today, enjoy yourselves.